Excavation est. Enigma cuderitas est.
Hello, my fellow seekers. Many people know of Cahokia Mounds in East St. Louis, Illinois, but not many know of the Jonesville Mound because it was destroyed. It is also known as the Troyville earthwork, or Site 16CT7, which is presumed to be a woodland period Native American archaeological site with components dating from at least 100 BC, making me think that the larger Mississippian mound culture may be a lot older than the 800 CE date that they give. The Mississippian culture rivaled that of the Aztecs and the Mayans, but over time the Mound Empire fragmented into many tribes, causing Native Americans to forget their lost history. As Harry S. Truman once said, "There's nothing new in the world except the history you do not know." The Troyville earthwork was once the tallest mound in Louisiana at 82 feet high. It is located in the Chiloilo parish of Louisiana in the town of Jonesville. The site is the type site for the Troyville culture of the lower Ouachita or Tensasa River valleys. Before it was destroyed for bridge approach fill in 1931, the main mound of Troyville was one of the tallest in North America. It had 9 platform mounds and a perimeter embankment that was built before 700 CE. The historian John W. Monte in 1844 described the complex as occupying closely to 400 acres and noted the existence of 12 small mounds with 1 large mound. The embankment was started during the Middle Baytown period, with a periodic repair work taking place during the Late Baytown period. The larger mound, or Mound 5, also known as the Great Mound, was 82 feet high. It was the tallest pre-Columbian mound in Louisiana and the second tallest in North America. Its base covered an acre of ground and had 3 levels, the bottom 2 rectangular and the third on top with a truncated conical mound. Monte described the lower level of Mound 5 as being 300 feet by 150 feet at its base and rising to the height of 30 feet. He described the conical mound on the top as 30 feet. Measurements for the smallest mound at the site were about 12 feet to 20 feet in height, with a base measuring about 150 feet to about 60 feet. 4 of the mounds were surrounded by a southern and western side of the plaza by the embankment, which measured 10 feet in height and 10 feet in width and 100 feet across. By the time of the American Civil War, the mound had been reduced to a size of 50 feet in height. During the Civil War, the mound was reduced even further when some of its fill was removed for the construction of Confederate rifle pits. In 1871, the town of Jonesville was founded on the site, and more of Mound A's fill was used for ditches and to level the land as the town grew. The townspeople frequently camped out on the mounds during flooding. In 1883, the site was visited by prominent ethnologist Cyrus Thomas, who described the group as then consisting of 6 mounds within the embankment, with some of the smaller mounds having been largely destroyed. One had been turned into modern cemeteries, which can still be seen today on the grounds of the local Methodist church. The Great Mound had also been reduced. By this time it was only 45 feet in height to 270 feet in length and 180 feet in width. In 1931, the mound was drastically reduced in size, the majority of its remaining mass being used as fill for nearby bridge approach. The site takes the name by Troy Plantation, which was part of the Spanish land grant of 1,000 acres made by John Habred in 1786. William Dunbar was the first European to make notes of the mound site in his report to Thomas Jefferson for the Red River Expedition of 1804. It is the first written description of the archaeological site in Louisiana. In 1931 and 1932, the Smithsonian archaeologist Winslow Walker excavated parts of the site. He found woven matting, palmetto fronds, and wooden planks within the mound, materials used by Native Americans as part of a complex engineering to building the larger structure. These materials have been used to construct the cane dome, which had been layered like an onion by altering the layers of split cane and mound fill to strengthen the structure. The builders also used different colors of dirt, including blue clays and red clays. Walker also discovered log palisades and steps made of tree trunks up from the corner of the mound. He published a 103-page booklet in his work, most of it kept in the Smithsonian and universities, which you have to pay to get access to. In the late 2000s, part of the site was being investigated for purchase by the Archaeological Conservancy, a non-profit organization that plans to protect the site from future degradation. The Conservancy purchased the site of Mound 4, and the old house located on the property was demolished. The Conservancy plans for a landscape and fence site and use it as a research preserve. One thing that makes me think that this site, along with Poverty Point, is older is its setback away from the Mississippi, which is about 15 miles away. For a civilization that relied on the rivers, this seems like a far distance, unless the Mississippi was farther to the west. But that time period when this occurred would have been at least over 2000 BC or more, based on the rate movements of the delta. At this time, the rivers would have been higher, especially around 10,000 BC, when the whole Mississippi alluvial plain would have been under at least 20 feet of water due to glacial melting over a long period of time. I think when it comes to Poverty Point, at one time it may have been a full circle, but then the river kept eroding it away over time, so the Native Americans had to reconfigure it to be a crescent layout and move the central mound to the outside in the form of a bird. Even Cahokia is set back 5 miles away from the main river, so if we know the exact time the river was at these points, we might be able to have more precise dates of these mounds when averaging it out with the artifact carbon dating. So I think Troyville could be far older since its setback is similar distance from the Mississippi, and that would have had to been around 2000 BC or more. Now if we go back 10,000 BC or more, the whole alluvial Mississippian plain would have been over 50 feet above the normal flood stage of today. To put that in perspective, when I went through the 500-year flood event of Iowa back in 2008, which reached about almost 40 feet above the normal flood stage. This is a map of Des Moines, Iowa, showing the maximum flood stage. Instead of it being a swath of water moving downstream, extending a length of 30 miles or so, during the Ice Age, the whole river for hundreds of miles would have been over 50 feet, and it was not just a temporary flood, it was just a normal flood stage. The whole alluvial plain would have been underwater. This was part of a larger glacial flood period, such as places like in the Pacific Northwest. To give you more of a perspective of what the glacial flooding would have looked like, this is an area where I live. So these hills over here, the Ice Age is what carved most of these rivers out, the actual ice itself. But during the melting periods, the height of the river would have been as high as that hill, or at least 3/4 of the way up that hill, which is about 50 feet, I would say, maybe a little less. So, and during the 2008 floods of Iowa, this building here, about halfway up that building, was flooded. So I'm lower right now, and this is still considered a floodplain. But during back 10,000 years ago, this would have been a normal flooding. A 500-year flood was just a normal river stage. So that gives you some context. Now, would this have inspired the Great Flood myths? No, because this was a gradual flood over hundreds, if not thousands of years. It would have just looked like a normal water feature to Native Americans. It was not a catastrophic flood. Those were limited to certain areas. I think there are two types of flood events we need to keep in mind: the gradual glacial floods that lasted for possibly 2,000 years, and the catastrophic sudden floods in a particular place and time, which seems to be in our collective memory, preserved partially in our myths, which some Native American legends hint at, such as the legends told by the Salashi elders, but it's been so eroded over time. Now, I did stumble upon another Native American legend in a book I found at the Harborside gift store at Mackinac Island in Michigan. My family was visiting the island, which we could see from our cabin at the lake. The book told of a Native American legend similar to what Genesis is telling. The book was called The Haunting of Mackinac, the next chapter. It talks about the legend of the Putwujinnini. The oldest stories of the Putwujinnini come from the Native American tales of folklore during the time that the giant fairies, or the Iyas, are said to have roamed Mackinac Island before the time of man. There were also similar fairies that were known to be dancing about. The smaller fairies were known as the Putwujinnins. Gitche Manitau called for the end of the time of the giants, and they left the earthly plane. Those who refused remained as giant rocks and boulders commonly seen throughout the island. Though the giant fairies left, the Putwujinnini did not. They remained to taunt and mislead, and generally mess around with mankind for the foreseeable future. One well-known historical account of the Putwujinnini was with a Frenchman living in the woods. The man lived in a cabin in a somewhat remote location. He had been expecting company. He decided to go out to look for them because he thought they might have got lost. But when he was coming back to his cabin, he assumed that what he saw was the lantern at his cabin, but didn't realize that it was actually a different kind of light. And he kept following the light until he realized the light got farther away. Then he realized that wasn't his house, and he got lost. Eventually he got back and turned around and was able to get back to his actual house with the lantern. But what he saw in the woods was definitely an unusual ball of light that led him astray. And this reminded him of the will-o'-the-wisp, as well as the Putwujinnini. And he thought that there was similarities between these two phenomenons that have been reported for ages. Following the legends of the island fairies, we come upon another story by a Native American called Chiaki, a spiritualist. Chiaki was camping what is now in Mackinac Park, or in front of Fort Mackinac. He was settled in his abode for the evening when he was approached by an unusual orb of light, or fairy, as you might call it. The fairy coaxed the Native American to follow it, and then he ended up at a cave. From there he saw more of these unusual fairies. And then the orb of light guided him back to his campsite. What you should take away from these Native American legends of the Putwujinnini, or however you say it, is that there is a supernatural context we cannot ignore when it comes to the flood epics. The reference of giants could relate to the legend of the Nephilim in Jewish tradition. It was not just about a flood, but also the intervention of something supernatural in the past that may have caused a catastrophe along with a natural cause that helped perpetuate these myths. Today, these Putwujinnini are most likely what we refer to now as the UFO phenomenon, but I would not assume it to be extraterrestrial, as Jacques Vallée suggests. We should not jump to that logic. Nor would I assume the literal idea of giants, knowing that these phenomena appear as orbs of light. If we peel back the poetic descriptions of these myths, we come to a similar description of today's UFO sightings. Other cultures have given different names, such as yokais in Japan, and the eerily similar Arabic word for jinn or genie, which goes back to the Persians. I bet there's a linguistic connection. So when Native Americans built their pyramid mounds, it was about connecting with these supernatural beings that manifest in the form of these balls of light, but also may have the ability to form into humans when they take control over human bodies through a possession. For they need to be an avatar-like body to take control over the human world, if there are laws in the realm of the supernatural, just as there are in nature. These pyramid mounds act like a summoning platform for shamans to perform their rituals to get these beings to appear for their blessing. In many cases, it might require human sacrifice because some are benevolent and some are benevolent and some are in the middle, just like people. So we need to be careful and judge it by its fruit. And I think many of these myths originated from a particular flood that perpetuated similar flood myths associated with the supernatural. And I think the location where something catastrophic along with the supernatural intervention happened would have been here. So stay tuned for my upcoming documentary on the Garden of Eden coming in August, and let us know what you think about these Putwujinnini and the Troyville earthwork.